we've got the dynamic duo across here. How are you? Good, good. Easy.
You got the good chair.
I don't know where it's at.
You and Scott and me.
Scott's got the PowerPoint. You don't have
I
to.
bet
We
you
didn't
like
put
the
yours.
Giants.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So does my future daughter-in-law.
Is that right?
Yes.
Gosh, this is a great, great weekend to be a Giants fan.
Yeah.
Anytime they beat the Dodgers.
I can go up there, right? I can go up there.
It's a different chair.
It looks like it. I think mine's a different one too. I don't know who comes in and moves the chairs.
I was gonna say, cause he normally has a back.
Yeah. Somebody moved them. You want to hire it?
No, but see, this is what I printed. So I said it. Good. Yeah, good.
We'll switch it. Switch it for tomorrow.
Just on the back, cause you guys.
Yes, he wants to speak to everything. This one is an odd one for here. We don't usually get this tall. They must be making this one.
Yeah, cause this has got like a little.
But we didn't have these originally either. I had a
How are you doing?
regular, like a
Good.
secretary.
Mondays are always a little bit, back.
And that way.
How was you?
So, but
Congrats on the promotion.
Huh?
Congrats on the new job.
Oh, thank you.
On the job you were doing, but now officially.
yeah. Yeah, John would go over backwards in that one. I know.
Congratulations.
There you go.
Because it doesn't stop. We're supposed to
I had
start
someone
at
looking for me and shaking my head.
No, we don't have a quorum.
And I got one.
And did you like the coffee?
Big doing.
It's totally.
I was just there because people are arguing with that's their spot.
I see, I see him there.
Camera, so he's like doing like all the.
But I mean, are we gonna get an earful
I'll go
today?
check with Paul.
Today? We are, right? Yeah, yeah.
Sure. Why not?
I love that spot. That's just so cool. You know, you're sitting in there and you're just like, oh, places like this the next time, especially in downtown. 'Cause
And I like it that it's not corporate. It's like really community.
That's for Scott. I seem to work that thing. Good to me.
you know, you usually see firefighters, parking enforcement guys, police officers, and
All the cows every time I'm there.
Works for him.
always, especially the bikers.
This right button's not working.
She's
You
gonna,
gotta
they're
hit
gonna move to
the bottom, the back.
near us at 400 East Main when we
The
move.
left.
Question.
And then they'll have, probably
Oh,
baking
well,
these scones.
now you
as
It's a little,
samples when they move.
you gotta put a little muscle behind it.
Yeah, kind of, because Freedom is okay, but they're way better as far as they're concerned. Because I'm a coffee drinker, so.
I like, so I know the owner of Freedom Coffee. I spoke to his law school class. So I see him like some conversations.
Oh, yeah.
He's from Humphreys next year. Darren's at school, so.
Yeah, he's supposed to be coming.
When are we gonna move it for like 4 for him?
3:30. We're moving it to 3:30 for him. Right now? 3:36.
Good afternoon. I now call this meeting to order at 3:36 p.m. City Clerk Page, could you please proceed with roll call?
Yes. Committee Member Holman.
Here.
Vice Chair Wright is absent. And Chair Tubbs.
Present. Moving on to item 2, public comment. I have Ned Leba, but I see you want to speak on 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and 3.4. So would you rather do it after we hear the presentations and ask questions? Awesome. Thank you. So moving on to item 3.1, Core Revenues Audit Report for the year ended June 30th, 2015.
Thank you, Chair Tubbs. Before you is the Core Revenue Audit Report. This is the first one that is being presented. This is from the Plan of Adjustment and it is in regards to agreed-upon procedures relative to the agreement with Assured Guaranty Municipal Corporation in the city of Stockton. This review is being done to calculate, to review and calculate any residual revenue that may be sent over to Assured through that agreement. For this year, there would be no payment remitted. Those payments would not begin until 2018, I believe, if they apply. But the report is done every year.
And just to refresh my memory, what would make the payments apply? What were the conditions we have to meet for us to have to pay them?
Right. There was a base core revenue calculated in that agreement, and then we're looking at the revenues, the core revenues, same classifications, and calculating an average of 3 years over that base core revenue. So in its simplest terms, it's a little more complicated than that, but in simplest terms, it's taking an average of 3 years over that core revenue amount, and then there's a portion of that that would apply to Assured.
Any questions?
No, I was here when we did all this.
Could have done
I
that better.
understand it. I think a lot of people just don't really understand, that we start making those payments in 2018, and whatever they're going to be based on our core revenues. That's why we still have to hold these purse strings tight.
We do, and this is built into your long-range financial plan.
Right.
Awesome. I know, Ned, you feel the card speaks to 3.1, so.
Good afternoon. Just a couple of comments. This actually is sort of an important subject. You asked the most important question.
I did something right?
I'm
joking. I'm going
You usually do things right. I only disagree with 10%, but I let you know what the 10% is. I hope it's important.
Yes, sir.
But the question about core revenues, you do want to know what is the liability. This includes the 2007 pension bonds, right? So when you ask, what is that base? Where would we be? What is the fiscal effect? That is extremely important. This is a mechanism for Assured Guaranty to see what they're going to get paid in the future. And just so you frame it, because this is why this is important, those pension bonds, let's call them $125 million, completely unsecured. Maybe they're on our books now at $55 million, probably a little bit low. Assured Guaranty may have it at $100 million. What does the city's computation of present value, what is it really? You're going to have to come up and make payments in the future, but when you ask that question, that goes to the heart of the issue, and that's really what you should be thinking about. Remember those pension bonds that are 100 completely unfunded, and I do agree, I think we need to look at all the numbers, but that is an obligation, and we should know what it is. Okay, there was a misstatement here. This is not an audit. This is not an audit. You'll read this entire document, and there's going to be only one place, and I'm going to tell you on page 5 that it will mention the word audit. And I think it's very, very, very important. On page 5, it says, "We were not engaged to and did not conduct an audit, the objective of which would be the expression of an opinion on the accompanying core revenues schedule." So when we start talking about Measure A and the proposal that is coming up from city management, it is this type of statement that would be embedded in the report that the city is proposing for Measure A, despite the recommendation over and over and over again of the Measure A committee and the vote of the city council. This is not an audit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ned. Do you have any other items to report out for 3.1? Awesome. Moving on to item 3.2, discussion of RFPs for city and measure.
I think we need a motion to
Yeah.
accept.
Oh, excuse me. Do we have a motion to accept?
Yes, move to accept the audit report.
Second.
It's been motioned and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 3-0. Now moving on to the big ticket item, item 3.2, discussion of RFPs for City and Measure A independent auditing services.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members, Scott Carney, Deputy City Manager. Formally, I'm happy to announce the Interim Chief Financial Officer. With us today in the audience is Matt Paulin, our new Chief Financial Officer. I'm sure you'll be seeing him in the future. Today, we're providing an update on our efforts to procure services for the audit of citywide financial statements as well as the Measure A audit. The City of Stockton is requesting proposals from qualified firms to review the financial statements for the city. We are doing that for the 15-16 fiscal years, the 2 subsequent fiscal years, and the period to submit proposals ended last week on April 7th. I'm happy to announce that for the City Independent Audit Services, we received 3 responsive proposals. We'll be moving ahead with the committee to evaluate those proposals and make a selection in the future. That's for our citywide financial services.
Any local?
So we're still in the procurement process, so I'm comfortable saying how many bids we received, but the rest of the information we'll disclose later. We're also procuring services for Measure A. If you'll indulge me for a moment, take you on a brief reminiscent tour. The Measure A Citizens Advisory Committee met on May 19th and took action to recommend a separate independent audit of Measure A revenues and expenditures. That action, or that recommendation, I should say, was also proposed to this committee on September 14th. And in between those 2 dates, city staff changed their stance on whether or not a separate audit was recommended. And the city staff on September 14th were recommending a separate audit. This committee suggested we go back to the advisory committee, talk to them about the supplementary display that was developed. We did that, discussion was held, and on October 6th, a recommendation was brought to council. Council did approve a motion to start the process to select a second independent auditor, and we are moving ahead on that on the same time frame as we are for the citywide financial statements. One of the things that happened since October 6th is because the council took action to obtain an auditor that was separate from the auditor doing the citywide financials, we did 2 things. One, we communicated to Puna McGeady that they should not do the agreed upon procedures to look at the expenditures and audit the expenditures of Measure A and B supplementary display. So the direction was to do separate. And then we realized that we needed to do the procurement for these services in concert with the procurement for services for the citywide financials to ensure that not only Puna McGeady, but whomever or whatever firm got the new contract would also not be looking at these expenses in the future.
Would what not be looking at?
Right. It would not be, so that Measure A and the citywide financials would have 2 different auditors. And so we wanted to do the citywide financial procurement, audit services procurement, at the same time we're doing Measure A to make sure that we had 2 separate auditors. Because Puna McGeady is already under contract, it was easy to tell them they could not do it. But to go forward, we wanted to make sure they were separate. There was a lot of discussion on October 6th about whether this was a 1-year engagement or a multiple-year engagement. We did, consistent with the comments that I made on October 6th, release an RFP for a multiple-year engagement, again, to ensure that we had 2 separate auditors. Unfortunately, to date, this also closed on April 7th. We have received no responses to the Measure A services audit services request, and we will be extending that procurement. I do have a little bit more information about that, but just to kind of hit a couple more key points. This is, the print quality is not as great as I'd hope on the PowerPoint, but this is page 182 of the 14-15 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. This is the supplementary display that was discussed in draft at the October 6th meeting that has been included in the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, and that's what we're asking for audit services to go review. A couple other key points. The Measure A RFP was previously released in December of 2015. We did receive some public comment regarding that. And so when it was re-released in March, we did make some changes to both the scope of services and the performance standards. And so the first bullet here is to highlight that the services must be performed by a firm other than the firm hired to do the audit of the citywide financial statements. The scope of services was expanded to specifically call out that Measure A was a general transaction and use tax, and to highlight that we would be asking the audit firm to review the expenditures and revenues as stated in the supplementary display of Measure A and B, which was included in the comprehensive annual financial report. And then the performance standards were also expanded to note generally accepted accounting principles and to specifically call out the Government Finance Officers Association best practices that were used for the supplementary display. All of those expanded descriptions are highlighted on the screen behind me. As I mentioned, and I believe if you were going to ask a question, Council Member, we didn't receive any responsive proposals. Staff did follow up with 8 firms to get some more information about why. And what we're finding is that for the large firms that would typically engage in something like the citywide financial audit, this project is too small for them. Number 2, they would have to rely upon the internal control review that's done during the citywide financial audit. And so looking at just the Measure A piece, which is a component of the general fund, was a risk that some of them were not willing to take. And then some of the smaller firms that might be open to a project of this size said that it was a bad time of year to be asking them to put together a proposal because they were in the middle of doing taxes, which leads us to the recommendation to extend the RFP deadline for another number of weeks, perhaps a month, to see if we get more proposals.
And I'm sure everyone has questions, but my first question would be, just given that I think some of the concern was before the next budget cycle, having another set of independent eyes in addition to the independent auditor that audited Measure A funds to kind of help alleviate people's concerns before budget. So with this kind of unable to get interest in performing this scope of work, what does that look like in terms of timeline? So say someone responds to this extension, will they have enough time to give us another qualified opinion by the time we look at budgets for this year in June, or?
I don't think it would be realistic. I mean, given that taxes presumably are due April 15th, but I'm sure a number of folks who are preparing those may have work that continues beyond that for clients with an extension. My recommendation would be to extend the RFP submittal window for another month to see what comes in. We would then have to put a contract in place. And so I don't think folks would effectively have it before the middle of June or July.
Okay, so then my concern would, and I'm not sure there's an answer for it, but my concern would be, I know that we have a bunch of citizens who are giving up their free time to serve on the Measure A and B committee, and they seem very adamant about the need for another set of independent eyes to independently audit what had already been audited independently previously. So with this not happening before budget, like is there a way, how are we working with the Measure A committee to at least explain this, or are we?
So the information about the lack of response is just fresh off the press this week. So
Okay.
as I said, April 7th was the time frame to submit proposals. I have been in communication with the chair of the Measure A committee and let him know that we were discussing it today. The committee's not scheduled to meet again until May 25th, if I have my dates correctly. Okay. The chair does have the discretion to have another meeting before then. The prior discussions with the committee, I would characterize as folks who are more interested in having accurate and transparent information and less worried about the timeliness. Having said that, I think folks were anticipating having the information before the next budget cycle.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Wright?
Yes, so obviously the RFP for citywide financial services came with much greater compensation than the RFP for the Measure A.
Correct.
Audit. So it would seem logical to me that anybody who is applying for the citywide financial services would not be applying for the Measure A just simply because they don't want to compete against themselves. Yes, there's a conflict there. So it would seem to me that any large accounting firm could carve out something, you know, to be able to do necessary work like this. I mean, it's compensation. So will there be a possibility that some of these larger firms that applied for the citywide financial audit would subsequently, if not chosen, come back and apply for the Measure A audit on a second go-round of the RFP?
I don't know that I have an answer to that hypothetical, but what I would say is that the RFP that we re-released in the middle of March anticipated this issue, and we actually put complementary language in both the citywide financial RFP as well as the Measure A RFP. And essentially in both of those RFPs, it specifies that any audit firm is welcome to apply for either or both, but may not be awarded both. So we were anticipating the situation where we have specific direction from council that it can't be the same auditing firm doing both, but recognizing that clearly an audit firm might want to hold out for the larger contract, we wanted to be clear that they were moving forward on commensurate timeframes and they were welcome to apply for both, and then we would make our selection.
No,
And then I know you filled out the card for this item as well. Yeah.
Thank you again, and this is a very important subject. You have the main audit, and I'm glad to see that you got 3 responses. That's very good. I will tell you, though, that the RFP was released on Saturday, March 19th. Questions had to be in by March 21st, and proposals by April 7th. That's far, far too short. It's great that you got 3, but you should have a lot more, and you would have a lot more if you followed the RFP provisions that you did for Moss Adams. Issued in November, full month, lots of responses for both of them. They should not have done this. They did this, and I believe that Mr. Holman remembers back in 2013, the reason it had to be compressed is the auditor resigned and we were behind in our audits, and Vanessa Burke said, gee, we just got to get someone in. But I think you need to I think Pund and McGady have done a pretty good job, but I think you need to make sure you have a broad net out there, because that was a very unusual situation. I guess I won't go through all the unusual parts of that, but I hope that you remember what Vanessa Burke said about why we had this very short period of time, and it should never happen again, and yet we have it here, and that's part of the problem with the Measure A RFP. Now, look, the RFP should go to the Measure A committee to look at. It is a slaughterhouse of problems. It is not an audit. It is a complete and total repudiation of the recommendation of the Measure A committee. The Measure A committee, and as presented to the City Council, the recommendation was an audit of the financial statements of Measure A funds, with the financial statements prepared in accordance with GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, and the audit conducted in accordance with GAS, generally accepted auditing standards, and GAGAS, which is generally accepted government auditing standards. Those are the exact words of the recommendation. That's what came to the City Hall. That's what the council voted on October 6th. The city's financial statement is not a GAAP financial statement. It is not a GAAP financial statement. It is a supplemental display of some financial information. The audit, you'll see no place in the RFP, just like on the other agreed upon procedures, it's not an audit. It's not an audit of financial statements. It's not any type of audit at all. And the city knows it. It's agreed upon procedures. Let's go out and pick some flowers. I'll tell you which flowers to flick, and then you tell us what you think. You want an audit of the financial statements of Measure A. This SSAE engagement was brought 3 times by management to the Measure A committee, rejected every single time. Brought to you, rejected. Provide a financial statement audit. That's what was promised. Look, you have some big problems here. The city attorney has conceded that financial reports provided to the Measure A committee that listed actuals, listed only possible costs, listed internally restricted amounts for 94% of the total Measure A claimed expenses. Now, this was an interim report. Your deputy city manager knows that. He made a pledge that things would be improved, and I believe that pledge. But a big part of the process to make sure these books are right is to have a proper audit of the financial statements of Measure A. You have 3 findings of material weakness in the CAFR report and significant deficiencies. You cannot rely on the internal control of the city. You just cannot. People are going to have to do an awful lot of work to get the financial statements right, and you need a financial statement audit. There's many other comments I can make, but hopefully you will understand, and I hope that some other members of the Measure A committee who are here will echo my concerns that we have a proper financial statement audit, and the proposal is not for a financial statement audit or any type of audit at all. So I hope you'll send the RFP process to the Measure A committee. I'm not so worried about the timing, to be quite honest with you. I would rather have it right. So thank you very much.
Usually we don't do this, but I just have a quick question for you. Sure. If we send this RFP to the Measure A committee, what happens?
I think they'll come back and they'll reaffirm again really what you voted on October 6th, an audit of financial statements prepared in accordance with GAAP, an audit in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. Look, the RFP, if you read it, it says qualifications. We want someone who's qualified as an outside auditor. Experience. We want you to show us what you've done as an internal audit. It's an incoherent document. It is completely incoherent. I mean, I shouldn't have to stand up here and embarrass someone, but if you look at it, you'll see that they're asking for internal control experience, internal audit experience. And at the same time, they want an outside auditor to do something called an SSAE. Look, we could flesh that out at the Measure A committee, or you could suggest that they meet informally with us and you can get it right, and you'll get a bunch of people who will respond.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I don't know if any of my colleagues have questions. I have a question, because I'm not trying to hear this for 2 hours again tomorrow, so I do want to flesh this out today. So help me understand, and is there a reason why the RFP looks like this and not like a traditional, I think a proper audit was the term that Mr. Liba used. Is there a reason why you chose to do this and not a proper audit?
I don't completely understand, so I don't think I'll try to explain Mr. Liba's position. But one of the things that occurs to me is that if one were to do a pure financial statement audit, and your city auditor sitting next to me can jump in as well, that would be on something that was a unique specific fund.
Like a restricted fund.
The general fund. Measure W was adopted as a different kind of tax, and it has a specific fund condition statement. So you can track all of the ins to Measure W, and you can track all of the outs. As we all know and has been explained here and to the Measure A committee, Measure A is a general transaction and use tax. So it is a component of the general fund. And as the prior CFO held the position, the comprehensive annual financial report, which is an audit of the financial statement of the general fund, meets all of the legal requirements to review Measure A annually. We changed our position, as I mentioned, between May and September because we realized the importance of Measure A and Measure B to the voters of Stockton. So we've developed a display that provides additional information, and that was done specifically with the Government Finance Officer Association best practice guidelines. And I don't want to add too much weight to this, but part of the reason this came out in April was not just to align it with the citywide financials, but after the release in December and the withdrawal, we went and received public input. And so part of the input we received was to use the Government Finance Officer Association best practice guidelines for items for which there are not specific auditing standards. And to the extent Measure A is not a specific fund, there is a supplementary display. We've put that in the comprehensive annual financial report, and we're acquiring or trying to acquire audit services to test the expenditures so that we can provide some measure of whether or not what is on page 182 of the CAFR is actually happening. And I believe that the RFP that we have on the street would provide that analysis and that measure by an auditor of whether or not expenditures are happening in that way. There are, after talking with the city auditor, you would have the option of doing something like a program audit rather than a financial statement audit. Financial statement audit, as I said, is not appropriate because this is not a specific fund, it's a component thereof. But a program audit would be to go out and test every expenditure to find out exactly what happened, and that would be something that is more comprehensive than the action taken by council. In regards to the recommendation to send it back to the Measure A committee, on October 6th, there was a robust conversation by the city council, and we specifically talked about the supplementary display, and was very clear that that was going in. And I don't want to speak for any of the three of you or your colleagues, but believe that that was fairly understood. And that's what we're talking about going out and measuring with this RFP.
Any other comments or questions from committee members? I see a card from Ms. Bain.
Good afternoon, Marcy Bain. I'm the Vice Chair of Measure A. And since May of last year, we've been asking for the audit. We've had lots of conversations at these meetings. But if you take it back to 2013, when the transactional tax was placed on the ballot, part of the reading of that ballot statement was that there would be independent audits and that transparency was sold to the public, that the Measure A money would be transparent. That's where I'm coming from. I want to know that what's being done is transparent for people to say, okay, it's being spent this way. I sit on the committee and I'm not sure. And so I think that's where we're coming from. So timing isn't about the budget piece. The timing is about transparency for the voters of the city to know that Measure A money is being spent the way it's intended to be spent, because there's a general consensus out there, it's not. And so I think it's not so much for me the specific kinds of audits, though I know a lot of the CPAs and the tax people on that particular committee want it done a particular way. But I think for the voters of this city, they need to know that this Measure A money is being spent and it's transparent, and it's coming from the city council that you want it transparent. So I think that's sort of my piece.
Thank
Little
you.
different twist on how it works.
So you mentioned on page 182 in the CAFR, there's some supplemental. Is that, can you just walk me through this? I've seen it, I have it, but in the interest of transparency, can you walk me through that and let me know what's on that?
I apologize, the print quality there is not ideal, putting it in the PowerPoint, but it essentially shows a display of the revenues that are available to Measure A, the expenditures that are occurring, and then the net condition at the end, or bottom line.
So it shows how the money is being spent.
Right, and this is something that is new for the 14-15 fiscal year. So the overall evaluation or audit of the comprehensive annual financial report met the legal requirements of the measure, and out of recognition of trying to provide a single consolidated display that provides information about how the money is being spent, this was included for the last CAFR.
So in the Measure A committee, I would imagine, had this or has seen this.
They have. So we provided a sample. We brought it to the audit committee. We took it back to the Measure A Advisory Committee on September 24th before we went to council on October 6th. There's, again, there has been a call in some sectors for a pure financial statement, but Measure A is not like Measure W. It's not a restricted tax.
Yes, I've been sitting here listening. I think Marcy Bain probably hit the nail on the head from what I've been hearing and what the constituency has been saying to me and what we heard from the constituency prior to the voting of Measure A and Measure B. My question is that, well, before I ask the question, I know that people just want to know, is the money being spent like you said it was going to be spent? All the other intricacies of what other kind of audits you can make, what's the best audit to answer those questions? What's the best audit to make it plain that the numbers we're seeing in this report here are valid, they're good, this is where the money's going, and I think that will answer the questions of whomever's looking at this. So whether it's a program audit, whether it's whatever kind of audit, that's the kind of audit that I think we need to see in terms of just validating what we're saying here are the correct numbers.
And that's where the RFP that was released is going to go have an auditor test these expenditures and answer questions about can you rely upon this display of the supplementary information. In terms of other options, I might defer to the city auditor if you're interested.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Audit Committee members. Mark Sturanker from Moss Adams, your external.
Before you start, though, I want to commend you. Your forms are a whole lot better than what my man over here is. I can read yours now. Well, yours used to look like that. They don't look like that anymore.
Over there that you can read them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd let you know. Sorry.
So here's my understanding of the situation. As I understand it, Measure A it goes into the general fund. So as Scott was saying, to do a financial audit, you have to be able to account for all the ins and all the outs, right? Mm-hmm. And as I understand it, the way that it's set up is you cannot connect the dots. The ins go into a black box, and then the outs come out of that box. And you can't draw a line between all of those dollars because they go into different accounts, they get commingled with other dollars. Technically, they go into the general fund, and then they do their thing. And so if you can't account for all of those, then you can't do a true financial statement audit. So to me, if you really wanted to understand, are we achieving what we wanted to with the measure, even though this would cost more to do than the agreed upon procedures, you would do a program performance audit. You would still have to make assumptions, though, because you can't connect the dots, but you would say, we set out to achieve A, B, C, D, and E. These are the outputs, the outcomes we're trying to achieve. We collected these many dollars to do it. To the best of our ability, we're going to track those dollars, but mainly we're going to demonstrate, did we achieve A, B, C, and D, and we're going to have to make some assumptions that some of these dollars were paid for those things, even though they went into buckets that mask that connection of the dollar in and the dollar out. So there would have to be some assumptions, but you would say, basically, you answer a bigger question, which is, we wanted to get the following things accomplished. Have we gotten those accomplished? And we have to make some assumptions that dollars actually, these dollars paid for that because they went into buckets that mask the identity of the dollars. So in my understanding, and if what I described is accurate, then you can't do a financial statement audit because you can't connect all the dots. But you could do, instead of agreed upon procedures, which is sampling, which I would say, honestly, that's nice, but if I were you, I would want to know, have we accomplished what we wanted to accomplish? To me, that's more important. You're going to have to spend more to do it, and it's not going to be that straightforward because you're going to have to make assumptions in the process. But I think that answers a more important question.
Well, if I may, because that's what I think that is generally asked for, because I think the general consensus out there is that this Measure A money went into a separate pile by itself and we're spending out of it.
Right.
And we're doing whatever we do and we're collecting over here. It's going into Measure A and that's it. And so you'll be able to tell where that money's going, which is what you just explained, makes it a little more difficult. So that's why I think it's important that whatever the best comprehensive audit that could be done, and it sounds like a program performance audit sounds more in line with what we're looking for, to give a clearer picture so there's a generalized acceptance of what we're doing with that money.
And let me just add to that really quickly. And thank you for the question. I think that was the right question. So in terms of what would that do to the RFP process, and would that make people more or less likely to bid?
Yeah, that's the next question.
Yeah,
so you have to make a URFP as well.
I mean, based on what you've been told from the ones that haven't bid or whatever.
Right. So the feedback that we've received is that the timing was bad.
Okay.
So that led us to the recommendation to extend the deadline for proposals, to have someone come in and test the expenditure reporting and see if that's you can rely upon that representation. What Mr. Strink is describing is definitely more comprehensive, and I think that would be different than what the council has given us direction to go do. Having said that, as I put on the next steps, council was very clear on October 6th that they wanted the issue to come back before a contract was awarded. So we can extend the deadline and see what we get and bring an update to council and have that discussion. In terms of the issue that the city auditor calls out, in terms of how the revenues of Measure A are treated, doing something like trying to put all of those into one bucket gets you into a different legal realm, and the city attorney's office has talked about that repeatedly with the Measure A committee of, you can't take a general transaction use tax and treat it like a restricted tax, because then your apple's turned into an orange. So we will be limited by the parameters of what the people of Stockton have approved.
And I just wanted to add, what was proposed in terms of agreed upon procedures is proper, given the way it's structured, and I think it does address transparency and accountability. But it can only do what it can do, and you just can't do a financial statement on it, so that's off the table. So it's just, all I'm throwing out there is, if you wanted to answer a bigger question, you could, but it's a different question.
And Reverend Williams, I see your card, so I'm calling you shortly, but I would say, I don't know how the committee feels, but I would say that when it comes back to council, I would just like to see some numbers as to how much performance management audit would cost. And I say that because this is a 10-year tax, and I'm not trying to have this discussion every single year. So as we got to spend money up front to massage, we're not going to help make everyone happy, but if there is a more comprehensive audit that allows us, because we have nothing to hide, that allows us to say, no, actually we're doing the best we can do with what we've been given, I think that's in everyone's best interest. But
I have a bias for action here. Okay, we've been talking about this for a long, long time, so I would like to see some attempt, at least, at an audit. I like the idea of extending the RFP and seeing what comes forward, but if nothing comes forward at that time, then I like the advice Mr. Strank has given us about looking at a different kind of audit. This idea of a performance audit makes all the sense in the world, because the performance goals are very clear in Measure A. So then we can go back and look and see how we're performing on that. We know on the hiring of police we're not doing very well. We're hiring tons of police, but we're not retaining enough to have the effect that Measure A intended. So we would not come out looking very good, I think, in a performance audit, but at least then we would have something to measure against. So a bias for action.
Well, Councilmember, I just say that Measure A, it was a hiring proposal. It wasn't a retention proposal. And so I think it's doing what it was set out to do. It's just that Measure A didn't cause the retention problem. The retention problem came from somewhere else, and it affected Measure A.
Yes.
And kept it from operating at the optimum that it was expected to operate.
But if we look at that performance aspect of it, the performance means that we're hiring and keeping.
Is that true?
Officers.
Yeah. I don't know what a performance audit does.
So I would add with that, even with a performance audit, you're still going to run into the same challenge of, here's what we set up in the measure as goals. And so think, for example, you'd say, okay, at year zero, here's where we were in these goals. We're at point A. And in 10 years, we want to get to point B. And if we do a performance audit anywhere in between, we're going to try to establish what progress we've made. But you're going to have to take some leaps of faith, for example. So you're going to need to say, if we hired, I'm making it up, 50 police officers in 4 years, I'm making it up. You can't, I don't believe you can say definitively that Measure A dollars paid for all those, right? Because you can't track every dollar. So you just have to be able to say, here's where we were, here's where we are. We got to assume that dollars had these impacts, right? But you can't technically say, because they went into a general fund, got mixed up, and came back out. And so really you're just looking, did we make progress towards this? How we got there is going to be gray. And that will make it a little bit more difficult. And you may still find yourselves, or one might find themselves still frustrated that you still can't connect all of these dots definitively. But that's just where you are. In a performance audit would probably also perhaps make some suggestions as to how can you account for things better, even though there's a line you can't cross based on how it's set up.
Okay.
So you're just a little bit in a tough spot.
Thank you. And Reverend Williams, I know you filled out the card.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and each of you. I'm Reverend Dwight Williams, Chairman of the Measure A Committee. A lot has already been said as far as it relates with all of the issues. Councilmember Holman, I believe you hit the nail right on the head as far as, in my view, what this whole Measure A issue is about, dealing with retention versus hiring. And I think that's really the issue. For full disclosure, I am not an accountant, and neither am I an attorney. I don't even attempt to imitate one. Nothing against accountants or attorneys, but I'm not one. But I have learned enough of the basic principles about how this is working by being not only the chair of Measure A, but also have the distinct pleasure, some may say burden, some may say I'm a sucker for meetings, but I'm also chairman of Measure W. And I understand the difference between the restricted tax, which Measure W is, versus a general fund tax, which Measure A is. I stand like with what Ms. Bain said, and that's really where I hope that we can somehow come out with this at the end of the day. I don't want to get off into the battle of the accounting minds. I'm like you, Councilmember Tubbs. I think that as long as we get this issue resolved for maximum transparency, if that requires in some type of way a special meeting of the Measure A committee to work along with staff in order to get that done, as chairman, I'll be happy to work with the city clerk's office to try to facilitate that meeting. Whatever we can do to get this issue resolved, whatever it is, a performance audit or whatever needs to be done to satisfy this for maximum transparency and accountability that the voters expected us to do, I think that's what we need to try to accomplish. So if that aim and that goal can be achieved, I hope that we can at least all agree on that.
Thank you, Reverend Williams. So, Scott, do you have clear direction? I'm not saying necessarily right now go back to Measure A. I'm saying go back out and do your RFP. And then come back to council. And then I personally would like to see just numbers, what would the performance audit cost, and then what would that do for the RFP process? But I don't know if...
I just had a quick statement and an agreement with what you're saying is, we came to this process and this situation in the midst of bankruptcy, the worst fiscal situation that this city has been in its history. We were laying off people. We were shutting things down. It was terrible around here. And in the midst of all of that, our citizens agreed to tax themselves. Mm-hmm. And we had 22% unemployment at the time. And they agreed to tax themselves. And that we might be able to hire more police officers because we were setting records in violent crimes in this city. So I think we owe it to our constituency that we do the best audit that we can, that we be as transparent as we can. Not to say that we're doing anything wrong, because we're not. I just think that for their peace of mind, if we have to walk that extra mile, because they walked an extra mile for us, for the city, I think we ought to walk that extra mile and do what we can to be as transparent as we can. And then we can only be so transparent, and that's it. So I think I'm in agreement with the chair that we get back both proposals. Let's pick one, and then let's run with it, whichever one it is, and let's just do it. That's what I see.
So, Mr. Chair, in regards to your question and clarity of direction, I think we do have clear direction from council. I think the RFP that we have released and extending it does move ahead on the additional transparency that's already taken place. This committee, as well as the council, approved the CAFR and the additional display of Measure A and B resources. So that is a step forward that's very concrete and real. It's page 182 of the CAFR. and we can move forward on extending the deadline to be able to test the expenditures, and we can also bring back rough estimates of a program performance audit. The one thing I want to make sure that I'm understanding and be clear about is I don't think that either the agreed upon procedures that we're already trying to procure or the program performance audit will deliver the financial audit that's being asked for today because of the general fund nature of the sales tax.
Well, that's definitely understood.
That's understood.
And from hearing from the chair and vice chair, that seems to be a different sort of argument than from what the majority of the committee or frankly the community is really looking for. But I think, especially if you look at like illegal ballot initiatives being put forth to restrict, like there's a bunch of conversation around the community around this money. So not only in this procurement and RFP process, but there's a better way for us just to communicate with the residents about page 182 on the CAFR. I think that will go a long way because again, I think oftentimes we do things right, but for some reason the noise out there, it doesn't seem to penetrate, and then we have to deal with meetings and things of the sort that distract us from doing the other great work to improve the city. So if there's any way, as an aside, although it's not audit committee business, to think through with either our PIO or others how to help better message how Measure A money is spent, I think that will go a very long way too.
Good suggestions. Thank you.
Awesome. Moving on, and I see your card for 3.3 because we're on item 3.3 now.
This was a discussion item?
No, you made your comment, Mr. Leva. I'm sorry. But we're going to move on to item 3.3. You can sneak it in then. So moving on to item 3.3, review audit findings, tracking report update. City Auditor.
I can't follow that one. So Mark Sternica, again, Moss Adams, your internal auditor. So first, thank you to the clerk's office for giving you a handout that you can read. Because I printed mine, and I could,
Yes.
it went off the page.
That is
and so I panicked a
That's
little
so
bit.
impressive.
So, thank you, Bonnie, Brett. Okay, yeah, no worries. So, a very brief update. So this is our quarterly audit findings tracking. You have 3 validated findings on the second page. You will see that 2 of them are IT related. So I might just note there, so you have a CIO on board, Director of Finance. Obviously, they've been very busy on a lot of different fronts, which is great. Obviously, you all are on Office 365 now, which, yes.
Off of GroupWise, more importantly.
Yes, yes. which is referenced in here relative to the second item. So lots of activity on the IT front. 2 of them happen to have relevance here to internal controls. The third item is purchasing related, and this was about delegation of authority for purchasing, and so that has been addressed at the city manager, deputy city manager level. These are very kind of straightforward and intuitive in terms of the actions that we're taking and validated, or information provided that we validated. So that is your quarterly update of audit findings tracking. Yes, Mr. Chair.
Well, I'm just really, all 3 are really good, but I'm really excited about the first one on the list in terms of network and infrastructure security with cybersecurity attacks and things of that sort. And given how prominent Stockton is in terms of the national discussion on cities, I'm glad that we have like a secure IT network to talk about the important things that cities do. So thank you. I don't know if the staff that worked on that is in the room, but send them our thanks because that's super important for the health and vitality of our city moving forward. And not having GroupWise anymore is also a good thing.
Concur.
Anyone else from the committee before I go from our honorary committee?
Just the second item, looking at the finding, the city uses GroupWise email system that runs on HP stack of blade servers and has no email archiving and deletion policy. And I think that second part of that finding was clearly the most important one. When we run into freedom of information requests and things of that nature, if we don't have a clear policy, then we're running into things like they're dealing with at the State Department right now, and what can we do and not do? So the more clearer that those policies are, then the more responsible we are to the public, and I can appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Leva?
Thank you very much. I'll make a direct comment on this fine report, which you know, the problem is you don't have the comprehensive report, and Mr. Wright was not here when you received the last one, which was March of 2015, that showed everything. And I realize you don't want to be overwhelmed, but I do think, for the benefit of Mr. Wright, for the rest of us, you should see what's there. And there's a heck of a lot, and that's one of the reasons there's still concern about internal control. I don't see the findings for the 2015 audit on here. I don't see the 3 findings of material weakness. I don't see the significant deficiencies. They should be added, and you should have a complete, one of these reports available, at least periodically. I can understand you don't want to go blind for every meeting, but okay. And so just to leave a comment, if you'll, a performance audit is a terribly difficult, horribly complicated, very expensive type of audit. A financial statement audit is very straightforward because the rules are known and it can be done. So let me just, I didn't read this to you, but I think it's worth mentioning. There is a tremendous controversy. The city simply resists doing a financial statement audit. It would flush out a lot of problems, and it is the paragon of transparency. Everything else is around it. That's why agreed upon procedures is not an audit. The big problems you have is you have all kinds of things on these displays, which are not financial statements, that look like they're possible costs, internally restricted amounts, or a huge amount of the Measure A funds. You could have outlays, and it wouldn't necessarily be an expenditure under GAAP. You want a standard of GAAP. So let's talk about this absolutely preposterous position. Management and the city attorney claim that traditional fund accounting and
Man, the city attorney is looking at me saying you're off topic, so I'm going to give you if you could do it in 45 seconds, it'd be
45
great,
seconds.
But if not, I'm going to have to...
45 seconds. Okay. The city attorney and management claim you can't have a traditional audit. Quote, here's the quote, "It will call into question the legal basis for voter approval. That astounding claim was made orally, okay, by the city attorney, verbally by the city manager. A legal opinion was prepared for us, never given to us. Let's see it. That's baloney. We should see the legal opinion." When I asked for it, this undisclosed legal opinion, they declined to give us because it's part of the deliberative process and not subject to disclosure. It's baloney. I gave them the rules under GAAP and the GFO for the type of financial statement audit, which is perfectly transparent and well-known, and you're getting resistance, and you're not getting a written
Thank you,
legal
Mr.
opinion.
Lieber. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Moving on to item 3.4, approval of committee minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
I forgot, Ned. You had 3.4 too, man. My bad.
Okay, well, why? Because look at the measure.
Mr. Lieber, let me call you up. Mr. Lieber.
No, you can call me. No, listen, we're all working for the same thing here, and that's for the good of Stockton. Look at the minutes. You'll see that Measure W was referred to go back to the Measure W committee, right? At the last meeting, very clearly, I brought it up. Mr. Wright, all of you said, yes, the audit and the financial statements should go to the Measure W committee, and that's in your minutes, and that is correct. Tomorrow, you put it on a consent calendar for the city council. You don't want it on the consent calendar. You want to go to the Measure W committee and then come back to the city council. So hopefully, I don't know if this is the responsibility of your committee or of management, but Measure W has to have a chance to take a look at that financial statement, and they have to have a chance to take a look at the audit. So tomorrow, maybe your recommendation is pull that from the consent calendar so it goes to the Measure W committee. Fair enough? Thank you.
Awesome. So then, before I move for adjournment, do we have any last comments from committee members?
Yeah. We have a motion and a second for the minutes.
I don't motion to accept the minutes.
So it's been motioned and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0. Thank you, City Clerk. So any closing comments from the Audit Committee?
Just to thank the Financial Department for all your hard work that you've been doing. Huh?
I didn't mean to stab you.
Oh, you did, though.
Well, thank you all. You guys have a good afternoon.
Appreciate you.
Meeting adjourned at, what time is it? 4:31.